Sorry, John.
Sorry, sir. Just so you know, we started the videos. We're all live.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Services and Organisation Committee meeting for September. Before we begin, I'd like to pay respects to the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet, the Gubbi Gubbi or Kabi Kabi people, and acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. Everybody's in attendance.
We've also got Councillor Denzel joined us as an observer online.
Tom's in the audience as well. There's no presentations or deputations today?
No.
Reports. Item 1. Have I got the right? Yes, I have. Item 1, 2020, Delegations of Authority Annual Review. Any questions for the staff?
Did anyone stay awake while they read it?
Oh,
yes.
I just wanted to, could you explain a bit about the 4 new delegations, and they're here on page 6. Is that in line with other councils, or what was the reasoning for that, or have we missed it before? Or?
It's not that they've been missed before, we just saw the benefit in including them this year, and I also consulted with the managers that would be dealing with those powers directly, so planning, for the planning environment court and even the coastal protections one, as well as the public records one. I discussed that with the IT manager, and they just saw the benefit in including them this year.
So what does it specifically entail for us as we delegate to Brett?
Yes,
Yep.
so these ones are for you to on-delegate to Brett directly, and then once that happens, it's between Brett and the other managers and directors to discuss how they're on-delegated to the staff. Okay. For them to be able to...
So I think your question was more about what are you delegating in those?
Yeah, that's that basically.
Yeah, so they're in attachment 1, and that lists all of the powers that you can on-delegate, and a couple of them I go into sort of the operational areas that they need to be able to do some of the functions that they do under their business. So
Has there been anything since de-amalgamation that's come up that has required matters under these acts to come before council that couldn't have been handled, that necessitate coming before council? I can't recall anything apart from the Planning Environment Court appeals that public records, coastal management would have been under policy or strategy, and the Heritage Act the same. That's probably about the only times we've seen those before council. Are there any specific matters that that have popped up that required delegation to be sought?
If you like, I'll help you with that one. Council, we report the delegations annually and update them. So in that situation, we identify new delegations that might be as a result of changes or new to legislation or new legislation. We also update the existing delegations, and we also put in an attachment which gives you the current delegations that are ongoing going forward. At any time, while they are delegated to the CEO, council can still make a decision on them. It doesn't mean that council can't make a decision on them as well.
I'll probably just add to that. There have been a couple of years where I've said I don't want delegation to council.
We appreciate the nature of
and some of those, for example, are where there's council has the power under the Acquisition of Land Act to take land or to acquire land. I've said no, that should be a council decision, but that's a very serious step. There are other ones where, even though council has delegated power to me, I go, well, actually, that should be a council decision. That's not, even though I've got the power to do it, that doesn't mean that council doesn't have the power. And sometimes I'll say, no, that should be a council decision.
So you're talking about council allowing a delegation to be revoked or amended, or you're saying?
No. So when something's delegated, so the council's got the power to do things.
Yep.
If it delegates it, the council still has that power to do it. It doesn't give that power away. It basically gives that power to me to also exercise that delegation if I need to exercise that decision making.
More often than not, it's been a matter of something needs to be dealt with before a council meeting can occur, and to give you the opportunity to
and it's probably the easiest way to deal with this is by way of example. So, you know, if we're going to buy $25,000 worth of gadgets or whatever they might be, you need a council resolution to that, or you're better off having staff make that decision. So we've the council's given me authority to spend up to $1 million. I very exceptionally will exercise that delegation for anything above $250,000. So anything to do with a tender, I could do it was over $250,000 or less than $1 million. I normally give that, I'll say no, let's put it through council, if that's public money and we should do that. If it's an urgent matter or something that's not of public import, for example, we might be buying a whole bunch of PCs or something, computers or something like that, but I might exercise the delegation because it's more administrative in nature. But generally, for that type of thing, I'll say no, council make the decision. But if it's a speed issue, I've done it also where we're trying to get a capital works program out the door and we've got some contracts that we're about to start some roadworks, wherever it might be. Okay, well, I'll exercise that delegation and we'll get things moving quickly. So that's the way I tend to work it.
Are there any financial implications to this process?
In what way?
Other than administrative type costs, are there any other costs associated with these delegation of powers that?
No, they're really, the reason for them is, touches back to that point of Brett's, it's for operational efficiency and effectiveness so that we can undertake carry on business as we need to without having to require a council resolution for everything. Can you imagine if council had to make decisions on everything? So it really is about the efficiency and effectiveness for the decision making. And the other is that there is no, in short answer is no, there aren't the financial implications. It just, it really goes back to, I suppose, the next steps. When powers are delegated to the CEO then may on-delegate to staff, but it's only the delegation and the authorisation, it's not actually dollars and the limitations around that.
There is the financial delegations side of things though too that is on-delegated from the CEO down to other staff, and they have a nominated financial amount that Brett approves.
So just explain that. So council's given me $1 million spending limit, if you like, to do contracts. And I'll pick Deborah as an example. So I then on-delegate not $1 million, but depending on the level of the position and the role, every staff member, there's a big list about what their delegation limit is, what they can spend up to. So I'm doing it from memory. Yours is 100,000 as a director.
Yeah.
Yep. And someone like Cassie, have you got one?
I think I've got $2,500.
$2,500. So buying stationery or whatever it might be.
Don't spend it all at once.
No.
So then, and I sign those off and they get audited as well. And then we also set up in our computer system so that the power to order online is then matched to what that spending limit is. So staff members got a spending limit for $2,500. They can't actually put an order into our IT system for $5,000.
And I know the Audit and Risk Committee has given information on that in the past, picking up where that hasn't
need to be aligned. Delegation and the actual authority.
And we have a register of those delegations.
It's all within the budget set by the council. There's tenders awarded for budgets, the capital works program. We're talking about tenders for projects identified and ratified by the council in the capital works program, not outside of that. And delegations basically cover enable the thousands of transactions that occur every day by staff, allow council to operate without decisions of council orders.
Otherwise we'll be signing off on every invoice that comes in.
That's right.
I had a question on page 11. There's the delegation of authority under coastal protection and management. It just seemed to be a contradictory thing. Perhaps you could explain it for me. It said power to appeal against the chief executive's decision to give a coastal protection notice to council. So does that give the staff power to appeal against the CEO's decision?
No, the chief executive is the chief executive of the department, not the council.
Thank you. Okay.
On page 8, Deb, so as I'm reading all this, there's inherent risk involved in all these delegations, including legal non-compliance issues. And I think on page 8 you mentioned that if the delegations are not current or council operators operate outside of their delegated authority, decisions and actions may be unauthorised and subject to legal challenge. Do these delegations form part of our risk management framework?
I'm trying to remember if it is actually identified in our risk register.
Well, it's certainly brought up in the audit if somebody's operating outside their delegated authority.
We've just
I can't recall if they're specifically referring to the risk register. What I can say is that they're reviewed by the Queensland Audit Office every year as part of the audit process to make sure that our registers are up to date, they're contemporary in terms of what other councils would have with their registers. And they also then look at the alignment between the financial limits for delegation and the systems as well. They check that every year.
That gives some control because unless they align, you wouldn't be able to proceed. So that there is alignment between the financial.
The only challenge may be where somebody's in a temporary position and has a delegation to spend more than they normally do when they go back to their position, that delegation is rescinded. Yeah.
However, that should be adjusted. So we would adjust that. So the other with risk is that this also presents an opportunity because for us to be able to monitor all of the changes in the legislation and pick up all of the things that we might like to look at in delegations, it's a mammoth task. So that's why King & Company provides this service for councils, and it gives us some reassurance that they've reviewed all of these and these are the ones that they put forward to recommend for council to consider. There are some that we don't take on, but that they provide that service for all councils because it's an incredibly big task to do this, and we are required to do it on an annual basis under the Act. So
most councils don't.
Beg your pardon?
Most councils don't do it annually.
No,
unfortunately.
no, but there is a requirement in the Act for that to happen. So.
So the central reason is for operational matters to be efficiently undertaken.
Yeah.
It also sort of is a bit of a shock about how many different pieces of legislation we operate under.
Yeah.
It's very complex.
Yeah, it is.
Legislative world out there.
But sorry, just one more question. I couldn't find any temporary delegations. I was looking for just delegations given to the CEO as a result of COVID, things like if there's a lockdown or if we're not able to form a quorum. Is that something that was considered or not?
We did that. There was a council decision in the last meeting of the previous council in March 2020, which gave authority to me to make those decisions. So it was a temporary delegation that only went through to the first council meeting of the new council. Okay. So the council still has all those decisions to make if we go back into that space, or the new council, if we then need to move quickly, could decide to delegate to me at that time.
And that's in relation to bushfires as well. I was looking for.
Well, there's actually powers for Carl under the emergency services legislation where he can make, along with the police, through the disaster management program, to do that sort of stuff.
Yeah, but not in here.
I think we ended up in use the term a Victorian situation.
Yeah.
Over the next couple of months, we'd have to look at doing something like that. But
yeah.
They're like having the council make those calls.
Yeah.
Right. Nothing further? Have a move?
I'll second it.
Second to Councillor Wilkie, all in favour? Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Catherine.
you.
Thank you,
That's all
Catherine.
right.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's months of work.
Yeah.
So
Yes, well done.
Thank you.
So much work.
Future CEO. You're making that.
See ya.
Ash.
Item 2, Noosa Leisure Centre, full year report to the 30th of June. Kathy, busy today, Ash?
Yes,
Obviously
I'm
looking
here on
after-
behalf of
obviously
all of
looking
my
after
team
things
today,
like this,
so
it's going pretty well.
fire away with all your hard-hitting questions and I'll do my best to answer them.
Questions, anyone?
Probably got two, but you go, Catherine.
Well, I said, I'm waiting to see if any of the councillors are raising it. They're all silent.
Yeah, I've got a few.
Fire away, Amelia, you can start. You can get us started.
On page 22, can you explain materials and services? What activities and services are absorbed in that amount? Yeah.
Certainly. So typically in materials and services, we've got all of our utilities. There are major expense in there, building maintenance, plant and equipment maintenance. Cleaning, any contractor expenses, purchases of stock for the facilities that have a retail shop, cost of goods sold for cafes. And there's a variety of other minor accounts in there, but
We also include the electricity bill and the water bill.
Yep, electricity, water.
Yep. And another, if you could clarify depreciation and amortisation. I looked that up, but I'd like to understand from your perspective,
Yeah, so amortisation probably doesn't happen very much in our facilities. Depreciation is the main one across our buildings and high value assets. Amortisation is where you're writing off the cost of something like software or something that's a little less intangible.
Licenses.
Yeah. So we do have a little bit of that, I think, in our IT overheads, but other than that, there wouldn't be any. So the vast majority of that would be depreciation.
Okay.
I've got a question on depreciation. Where do we sit on the life of the leisure centre and where it sits in its depreciation life?
I don't actually know what the asset register is saying at the moment in terms of its useful life and how much further it's got to.
Because it'd be componentised.
Completely written off, yeah. They do regular revaluations as well, which then bumps things back up, and that's where you might sometimes see depreciation can be quite stable for a couple of years. And
well,
then
as you revamp an area, the depreciation changes.
Yep.
The area obviously
yeah,
upgrades in value.
or if the overall cost of the building's revalued, I think that can go up because the depreciation you need to allow to replace it will need to scale accordingly. So I try to keep out of the dark arts of accounting and leave that to Trent and the team, but that's my basic understanding of it.
Maybe another way of asking that question from Joe is that in terms of the overall condition of this particular asset, the leisure centre, obviously we've done the floors and ceilings and all that sort of stuff, but the overall frame
I think
getting a little bit.
You read exactly where I was heading with the questioning. What needs doing next? What needs doing next? And what are we up for?
The stadium floors would be the next major piece of expenditure on the building if we were going to replace like for like, but we need to be doing some thinking before we get to that point with regard to master planning for that precinct and whether there be a reconfiguration of the stadium and other uses, all that kind of stuff. So that's certainly in the pipeline over the next few years to do some of that thinking, but probably within the next 5 to 10 years you'd be looking at major refurb, I would have thought, but
like the library after 20 years.
Yeah, so it's 20.
It's got to be. It was 30 years.
I think it's 27 years this year. Yeah, so it's getting up to 30 years.
Actually, I think it's a great result that we're only $9,000 behind the net budget position based on the fact that March, April, May, we nearly closed 3 months.
Yeah.
I think that's a really great result.
Yeah, I mean, that speaks volumes for how well the facility was going, and credit to the team there prior to March.
Absolutely.
Obviously, it's a bit of a downer to finish with the final 3 months in that regard, but as you say,
that was based on a record high in 2018 and 2019. So you take that year away, you actually performed really well.
Yeah, it's been trending up, which is really pleasing to see, and I think
it shows how necessary it is for the community.
Absolutely,
it's a much needed resource and well utilised.
What's happened since 30 June? This report goes through there. What are you seeing in terms of the last 2 months? The numbers today.
So most of our services are back on offer. There's not much that we're not doing, but the numbers are definitely down. So, maybe 30-40% lower than what we would otherwise expect at this time of year for those programs, which is understandable.
Is that due to the social distancing requirements, or people are reluctant to engage again?
Yeah, not much of it's because of restrictions that we've got on numbers. We're pretty fortunate at both the leisure centre and the aquatic centre that they're very large facilities, so we're not trying to program small spaces that are heavily constrained, but it's more just about people's willingness to come back out and do what they used to do, I think, and possibly some of that's economic impact as well, whether people are making a choice not to spend money on things that are ultimately a discretionary expense, but it'll be interesting to see how that progresses through till Christmas, and then we wait and see where we are and see how the second half of the year goes compared to a normal year. So.
I think it also speaks to the general anxiety within the community. So while people might report that they want to get back into activity, we can see through our facilities and our community organisations that when it actually comes to it, they are highly anxious. They might come along for 1 or 2 sessions and then go, no, I'm feeling uncomfortable because somebody sneezed or they were too close to me, and we're seeing people then back out.
I'm wondering if an element of that is because it's an internal activity. The external activity at the outdoor sports centre being
seen at the aquatic centre as well.
So it seems to be across the board, and every time there's another case, it ripples through.
You mentioned in the report that the cessation of the mini library
Yep.
and decrease in large events attributed to lower numbers. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so when the library was being refurbished in the prior financial year, we had a mini library set up at the leisure centre. So when people were visiting that, we were recording that as an attendance number at the leisure centre, just to get an indication of how many people were coming in and out of the building. So that obviously boosted the numbers significantly. And then we have different events that kind of fluctuate over the years at the leisure centre. So we've had Noosa Alive a couple of times have run a large opera event which has brought several hundred people down. We've had book fests and conventions. There was some kind of yoga and meditation.
The book fest in May this year, didn't they?
Yeah, they had penciled it in for October, but they've decided to push it back to May again next year. So, but certainly our attendance numbers in our core business in terms of group fitness, stadium sports, we're tracking really, really well, particularly group fitness through to end of the third quarter. So.
And the over 60, the over 60s, over 65s.
Yeah, so the Ageing Well
Fitness program, the Ageing
Well.
Wellness program's going really, really well.
Yeah, had a great response to that.
Getting great feedback.
Yeah, a really good partnership.
Are we going to continue on with that?
Yeah, my understanding is that will be kind of an ongoing offering. And
Terrific.
yeah, it's great to see the community development team be able to partner with us at the facilities, and then also Noosa Community Support with their aged care focus, kind of all working together to support the community. So,
and a number of activities transition through the leisure centre as they start as fledgling organisations or fledgling activities, and they grow and expand. Pickleball's looking to expand and move out of there as probably the next one coming out. Basketball sort of grows and goes through phases. And
we're seeing some really positive outcomes as well for carers. So for Noosa Community Support clients who would typically go to the centre for a day of respite, or if we're taking them out on the road for an outing, to actually connect with their carers and give them a chance to network with us and other carers in a similar situation and get some exercise down at the leisure centre, then they're getting that kind of support group and introduction to exercise as well. So, yeah, some real positives in that one.
Thank you.
And you have some terrific staff down there too, Ash.
Yeah,
really,
absolutely.
and they're part of the success. Yeah,
no, they are the success.
they are. Good on you.
I just get to write the report at the end of the year.
Just on staff, you mentioned that between March and June, when the leisure centre was closed down, the staff were redeployed, doing a whole variety of really what interesting things, but including helping out community organisations.
Yep.
You mentioned a food outlet.
Yeah.
And so, how did the staff find that experience?
Yeah, overall, really positive. Not everyone went over there, but the staff that did go over to help out found it to be really rewarding, I think, and it was great to see that it was something that obviously helped our staff out at a time where they needed to keep working, and we were able to help out a community organisation who was delivering a vital service, and the demand on that was increasing, and they'd also lost volunteers because of COVID. They were withdrawing from the services and demand was increasing. So to be able to find something that worked really well for everyone was really pleasing. And my understanding is some of our staff have actually chosen to continue to volunteer their time now.
Great.
In some of those services because they enjoyed it so much and got so much out of it.
So in terms of their mental health, how would you say your staff are after the shutdown? As a result of the
shutdown? Look, I think
okay?
everyone goes through ups and downs for a variety of reasons, not just work-related reasons. It's really pleasing, obviously, now at the Aquatic Centre and the Leisure Centre to pretty much have services back to where we were. Hours are still down a little bit, so some staff probably aren't working quite as much as they would have, but we're doing all that we can to support them through. The team at the J are obviously more heavily impacted at the moment, but again, there's a really good story there where we've got a couple of the staff from there. They're actually working down at the Leisure Centre who have a bit of a staff shortage at the moment due to planned leave and some staff that are off on sick leave for a bit. So we've got a couple of the staff down there doing several shifts a week. So the flexibility to work together and juggle things around has been really good. And we also
cross-pollination, variety is a good thing.
Yeah, and we still have one of the staff members from the J out there using our council van to deliver some of the meals, so picking up down in Maroochydore and delivering out to our community to get meals out to those that need them. So that continues on and has been really positive and rewarding, I think. So.
Working in some of our bushland reserves, weeding and planting as well.
So how many meals has he delivered?
Thousands. I don't know exactly how many. Yeah.
Joe, can I ask a question? I'll go
Far away.
heads up to Ashley. I was going to ask this. One of the things when you look at these reports is you get to see the financial performance and then also the number of attendees. And when you mash those together, you can actually get a better understanding of value about what it costs per visit. And so I asked Ash to put this together, which he's now done, to include this. You might just want to talk and explain what this looks like. It really shows the impact of COVID. Because while, so for example, this one, the financials are only down 9,000, the numbers are down, so the unit rate, if you like, or the cost per visit's actually gone up a fair bit. This helps identify that.
Yeah, so what we've got, where we talk about the operating expenses, so I guess, this is net cost, so total expenses minus revenue gives us a net financial result, and we've got two different categories. So the net operating result is exclusive of depreciation and internal charges, and the reason why we don't include that in this metric is that they're actually out of the control of our facility coordinators. They can't determine what the depreciation is going to be, and they've got no control over the internal charges, which are the costs that are reallocated from head office, if you like, out to our facilities. But they can control, utility consumption and staff costs and those material and services charges. So they're the lower columns, and then when you add in depreciation and internal charges, obviously the cost base increases, so the cost per visit increases. But you can see, certainly for the operating costs for the NAC, we actually had 2 years ago where we generated a very small operating surplus. So total revenue was just ahead of operating expenditure there for the full year, which was the first time we'd ever done that, and was an incredible result. So I guess you could say that that's certainly been flat, if not trending slightly down up until this year. You can see that the total cost per visit has been trending up, and that's predominantly to do with some of those depreciation and internal charges costs, which have changed over the years as well, depending on the methodology that's been used to allocate them. But you can certainly see the big spike this year. And at the NAC, it was the double whammy. So not just the COVID shutdown, but the 2 months at the start of financial year for our maintenance shutdown as well. So you've almost got 50% less attendance to share some of the costs, and some of those costs do stay fairly fixed regardless of whether you're open or not. The leisure centre, you can obviously see they're actually trending down. So from left to right, that's been trending down every year for the operating cost per visit, which is really pleasing. And has spiked again this year, but as you said earlier, Amelia, it's only marginally higher than a few years ago, even with 3 months missing, which is really good. And then the J, similar story there, that's reduced really pleasingly the last few years until this year, obviously, where it's spiked back up. So I guess we use that metric because it's a really good way to determine value, not just on financial performance, but if the facility costs the same to run each year, but we actually can increase the numbers through the door by 20% or 30%, then we're providing more value because more people are utilising the centre. So I should have included it earlier, so it's a bit of an oversight to not have it in the report, so apologies for that. But
that's a good metric. Good metric
it's
to
right.
follow. And when you're getting down to well under $1 a visit, like you are at the NAC there, I mean, that's 50 cents.
Yeah. It's there've been plenty of aquatic centres around the country that would love to have some metrics like that. So.
Because the aquatic centre also, we'll get to that in a moment, had the shutdown earlier in the year for the refurb anyway, so it was a bit of a double whammy there.
Yeah, it's got to be double whammy because it's going to get more depreciation now. Ash for the newness of the facility.
Which is why we'll continue to split it into the two and look at the operating costs.
That's why I knew that's why I asked the question about the leisure centre. I knew we'd poured money into the aquatic centre, and I knew the leisure centre was coming for sort of 30 years, so I was...
So, Councillor, this just if I can judge just some sideways for a moment, this is sort of metric that's quite good when we look at things like the Inland Park, where you go, okay, what's the total cost? How many people will use it? Therefore, what's the value? It's not just about what something costs; it's about the value compared to the usage. So,
that'll be a difficult one to ascertain the numbers using it.
So that gives you an idea of that.
Count on the gate.
Anyway, so just an idea as to how you look at not just the cost, but usage.
Good outcome under trying to circumstance.
Well done.
Ash.
Thank you.
Anything further? Can I have a mover to accept the report? Thank you, Amelia. Seconder. Thanks, Frank. All in favour? Item 3, the Noosa Aquatic Centre. Just talking about. And your full year report to the 30th of June. Any questions or discussion?
St Andrew's pool opening, positive or negative? You've had enough time now to ascertain whether it's had a positive or negative impact on the aquatic centre. What do you think, Ash?
It's still a little bit hard to determine because it opened, I think, just as we were trying to reopen from the maintenance closure. And it was a little bit unclear as to whether our numbers were down there because it was taking people a while to get back in the habit after having a couple of months off over winter. I think Learn to Swim is probably the program that's most impacted. So there are our swimming lessons. And we expected that. We said, you know, if you live closer to Bridgend Springs than you do the aquatic centre and you're just looking for a swim school that's nice and close and convenient, there probably aren't too many people that are going to drive straight past one to get to another, unless they're already at the facility and, you know, they've got a great connection. So we expected that to have maybe about a 15% impact, which broadly aligned with the numbers. In terms of general attendance and income, obviously we'll see a reduction in some of the revenue that we would have got from St Andrews directly for their school swimming programs. Some of the water polo will transition over time, but that's not necessarily a bad thing because it actually frees up some space for other users at the centre. So I think it will have some kind of financial impact on us, but we're hoping that over the next couple of years, the spaces that open up because of that are filled by
look at the
other
opportunity
and other people.
Look at the opportunity.
Nice question. Why have we lost so much money in the Learn to Swim revenue? 604, 689, 703.
Sorry, which table are you looking at there? Claire?
Sorry, I beg your pardon. Page 29, revenue.
Sorry, again, the accounting dark arts, the negative is actually revenue in this table.
Okay, so it shouldn't be in brackets.
No, well, the accountants will tell you it should be, but it is confusing.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, so everything in the revenue table there is income. It's not a loss. We don't have, this table isn't broken up to show expenses allocated at the same activity level. We can run some of those reports, and certainly if you've got an interest, I'm more than happy to step you through at a more detailed level. But
swim revenues are positive for the bottom line.
Yeah. I mean, Learn to Swim typically.
It does look odd with everything in brackets, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
It's costing us a fortune.
Yes, it's going to.
It does get confusing because then some of the tables you've got brackets around things that truly are a deficit as well. So it takes a little while to get used to that when looking at these reports.
So Ash, at the Leisure Centre, $9,453 loss, which appears something that can be recovered.
Yep.
Aquatic Centre, it's $102,362.
Yep.
What's the likelihood of that being recovered over the next, say, 6 months? Unlikely?
I wouldn't say it's highly likely over the next 6 months, but if you give us a couple of years, we'll do our best to peg it back. But look, I think it's obviously none of us could have budgeted for a COVID shutdown, and that's always going to have a big impact. And I guess that's why we've had some tough decisions to make in terms of how do we control costs as much as possible. And you know, we'll need to, as the COVID situation hopefully stabilises, we'll need to do some really careful forecasting for what does lie ahead, and have a look at how we operate these facilities as efficiently as possible. But
have we leased out the cafe, Ash?
We haven't done the full program that we normally would have because of the situation we're in at the moment. So we do have operators in there continuing under a fairly temporary arrangement until it's a better time to actually go to market to get the best deal for us there. So hoping
is to lease, not to run it.
Yes, so we haven't run.
Very good, those current operators.
Yeah, we haven't run that directly ourselves for a number of years. And
why is that? Is there an opportunity there for council to run it? Just
look, when we did run it, it was one of those services that probably isn't our core business. And when you start to staff an area like that, with that level of variety that's expected in food and beverage and the hours that are required there, then all the staff would be council staff. Our employment arrangements perhaps aren't as flexible as some of the hospitality arrangements that reflect the hours of that industry. So it's really the complexity, and we have actually been previously under that contract when it's leased out. we are making a return on that. So it is a revenue stream coming in. We're not paying somebody to be there, they're paying us to operate that business. So for us, it's simpler to have somebody come in and give us a guaranteed sum without us having to worry about running a cafe 7 days a week. So.
From memory, the last leaseholder actually also ran another food and beverage outlet somewhere else, so they complemented each other.
Yeah, so there's potential for that.
They bring their food, prepare their food at one outlet and bring them in between the 2 outlets.
Yeah. So no, certainly the intent is that it'd be a very difficult time to go to market at the moment.
You don't know what you're selling
Without patronage being at the numbers that it normally is, and without certainty on
and they're long hours.
when it will pick back up. So.
Anything else?
Just Ash, the master planning process which you're looking at, when are you looking to start that again? Wait till things settle down, or you've got a time frame to?
No, look, it's certainly something that, in terms of this master plan, I don't think we're envisaging going out to an external contractor to develop something like they might if you were doing it from scratch and looking at major facility redevelopments. It's really a matter of us internally putting down some of our ideas on what we think are possibilities over the next 10 years, and then starting to have discussions about prioritising and possible costs and
commercial leases along that side.
Sorry?
So commercial lease or allied health or whatever it might be, all that stuff.
Yeah, that would certainly be in there. So, look, I'll be hoping over the next 6 months that we get it to a point where we could come back and have some discussions, and then, that might then lead us to a point where we say, okay, well, let's do some more detailed work on these different ideas, and that may be where we go out and get some external input into the numbers and modelling and whatnot. But
I'd hope to do a master planning process will tie in with a precinct plan for that whole Sunshine Beach area, from the incorporating the school, the leisure centre, the Bicentennial Hall, the rugby club, and the opportunity schools, and Girraween potentially.
Yeah, look,
as a giant, one conglomerate.
Always happy
under a
to
master plan as well.
Join in and that kind of stuff at the moment.
It might give direction and purpose. It also may give linkages that you may not have with the other organisations that are close by.
Yeah, look, it's obvious that there's some real benefit having a number of similar organisations close by, and the ability to share some of those facilities, and when you've got visiting sports teams and carnivals and all that kind of stuff, that it is quite central. So something that probably should be looked at.
Again, the redeployment, Frank, you asked about again, these guys got redeployed, some of your staff.
Yes, yep.
Similar story to...
Yeah, so it was quite similar across the facilities.
Yep.
So at times there were jobs that could be done around the facilities, just in terms of, a bit of tidying up and cleaning and sorting out the shed and all those kind of things. We did help some of the other community groups around as well, so some of the sports clubs that were looking for a little bit of maintenance or assistance. So,
And just looking at the figures of the full year attendance comparison from 2015 to 2019-20,
yep.
You hit a real high in 2016-17. Is that variation, that slight decrease to 2018-19, is that considered significant?
I wouldn't say it's significant as a percentage of the total numbers.
So about 1%.
Yeah, it's probably a couple of percent.
And was that like the factor that Amelia mentioned, the opening of the St Andrews pool, or was that? When did that happen?
No, that would have been more in 1920, so the financial year we're reporting on.
Was it just a bumper summer in 16-17 or something?
Well, look, as you say, it's probably only 2%. The drop off from 16-17 to 18-19 is probably, barely 2%. So you'd expect
not significant.
Some kind of fluctuation.
Would it have anything to do with the Olympics? Everyone watches the Olympics, gets into sport. You think about Rio, I'm going to learn to swim. I'm going to get my kids into swimming.
Possibly.
What date was it you actually closed though? Was it June 2019?
Oh, sorry, 2018-19 is missing a week. Because we did shut on the 24th of June. So, that's probably a couple of thousand visits. But, I mean, we've probably always been monitoring the financial performance pretty closely, because it is possible to have less people but more revenue coming in if you have a higher yield per member or customer. If they decide that they want to do more activities, instead of buying the base membership, they upgrade to the full membership because they want to swim and gym and aqua aerobics. So,
which are right, Claire, a positive result at the Olympics or a World Cup or a particular sport does bring an influx of interest in.
Tennis is never more popular in Australia than in January.
That's true. Because the sales revenue was at a peak in 16-17 as well.
The retail sales?
Yeah.
That kind of 16-17, 17-18 I think was probably about as good as it gets. It's probably a perfect alignment of a few different factors there. I think town was just really, really busy. People were spending money without a worry. Probably had some good weather. That can be an impact at the NAC as well, depending on when you get
weather definitely has a big impact on that.
Bad spurts of weather and how they fall can impact. But
no storms through summer there that shut it down what I can recall off the top of my head.
yeah, but it's very hard to draw real conclusions from 1920 because of the interruption.
Of course.
Not knowing how long it would take for numbers to get back to normal after closures as well. So.
Okay, anything further?
Yeah, thank you.
All good? Okay. I'll move it to accept the report.
I'll move it.
Thank you, Amelia. Secondly, Claire. All in favour? Thank you. Item 6, this is the Community Support full year report.
The J.
The J.
Where's the J?
Item 5.
I missed 5.
Page 33.
Four.
Oh, scanning through one too fast. Oh, missed
The
both of them.
J's.
Sorry, I've gone past both of them.
Page 33.
I was scanning too far. Excuse me.
It's just impressive on page 36 that the list of customers that we deal with at the J. It's really
There's
really engaged with a
that's
lot of community.
a lot of
groups.
variety there, and it's really pleasing to see how well utilised it has become compared to probably 5 years ago. Total occupancy, number of days that the theatre's utilised is really, really pleasing, and it was certainly getting to the point where it was difficult to fit groups in when they wanted to book. We had people booking 2 or 3 years in advance for some of the key dates, and groups fighting over the dates that they wanted.
You had to,
I think this one's a really tough one for the staff because they were on track for a really good year, and we've been able to get the other facilities up and running, but the J is doing limited activity, so they put so much effort into
Yeah, I think it would have been a record year.
Probably the best way to look at that is you have a look at the graphs on page 37, with the full-year attendance, and you can see that trend going from 55,000 back in 14-15 through to 90,000.
Amazing,
Yeah, we also expanded the seating.
Yep.
Upstairs areas.
Probably would have been on track to break that this year.
Yes.
Yeah, I did actually do a little bit of stuff on normalising the revenue. It gets a little bit tricky again because of the timing of payments and whether you've got more shows in the first or second half of the year. But on a very basic normalised level, we would have been on track for record revenue. So 17-18 again was kind of our peak at the J. And we did talk, I remember after that year, we talked a bit about the fact that, we thought it might slow down a little bit as the economy kind of tightened and town slowed down a little bit perhaps. But I was pretty confident we were going to break 700,000 again in total revenue this year. And I think we were, $50,000 up or something at the end of February. But
you look at that graph on that same page, with 650,000 probably in the first 8 months of the year compared to under 595 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
So what is seating capacity 466? What is the seating capacity at the moment? What numbers?
So our total seating capacity is normally 402 if we have the mezzanine area.
Okay, I've added the 50 capacity separate meeting space for people. Okay,
Okay, so we've got 3. So basically in the theatre, we've got 338, which is the flat seating, and then the tiered seating. And then we've got another 64 up in the mezzanine area, which we don't always activate, but if somebody's got a show that's going to sell out, we can activate that up on the upper mezzanine. So let's call it 400.
What is allowed to be seated, Ash?
Yeah, so the COVID safe plan that governs the J,
what do I think, 60?
They talk about you can have either one person per 4 square metres or 50% of your seating capacity, whichever's greater. But then the caveat on that is that you still need to be able to maintain 1.5 metres between different groups that are booked separately. So in theory, it sounds all right to begin with. You say, okay, well, 400 seats, 50% of that's 200 people. We could probably do that. But then when you look at how the seating is configured, if somebody's sitting in this row, you have to have space in the row in front and the row behind and to the side of them. And if people are buying tickets together, that's okay. You can group, 6 people together. But again, you've then got to have the row in front and the row behind. So we reckon it's probably about 20%, 20 to 25%, depending on how many people you can actually get to book together.
Yeah.
So 100 kind of best case, probably a little bit lower if you don't have large numbers of people booking together. So
And they can't break even on that number, can
no, I mean we'd be more than happy to have an event at the J in the theatre if it was viable for the person or the group that was hiring it. But at this point, there's not many around where it is viable. We are looking at a couple of end-of-year events for some of the local dance groups or the schools who are considering putting on, say, maybe a Friday night, a Saturday matinee and a Saturday night, and because they may be able to sell groups of 10 or 12 and then parents can work together to, you know, sit together. Maybe the numbers are slightly more viable, but for a touring performance, which is predominantly what we have for the larger ticketed events, a lot of them can't tour at the moment because they're coming out of Victoria or New South Wales and, you know, coming up the eastern seaboard, which they can't do. But even if they could get here, you know, to sell 100 tickets and have to pay for theatre hire and the staffing costs and, you know, the artists, it's unfortunately just doesn't stack up.
It's also that, you know, for some of those events, a key component of that is the bar, and under the current arrangements, if you're operating a bar, it's got to be seated. So, you know,
and it's significant, the sales.
Add to the complexity of trying to put an event in, not just in our theatre, but in any venue. They're really struggling.
Yeah.
Now, the future of the J. Master plan wise, thoughts for the future. Expansion, more storage, or
so we've had a couple of wins on the storage front.
Flight towers, more seating, bigger stage. What are we aiming for?
Well,
what do we need to get those touring events in? 500 seats.
Look, I think 400 was working pretty well. There's no doubt there's some shows where if you had 500 to 600, they'd sell out. But whether the additional cost of building that can be offset by ticket sales and additional operating costs. It's not for me to make the final call on where value lies, but I'd suggest that it'd probably be difficult to make the numbers stack up.
Venues of this nature typically don't break even.
No, well, even in its current format, you know, it's kind of $250,000 operating loss plus the depreciation internal charges. So it's very much a community service. It's a great community service, but the bigger it is, probably the more it costs to fund it. I think, you know, what we'll be focusing on now is just trying to get back somewhere near what we were. And the reality probably is that that's going to take another couple of years to rebuild where we were. We're looking at replacing the seating at the moment, which would be great because that is 12 years old and we do get quite a few comments on it's not the most comfortable seating around. So that would be great, but we've done the PA and the sound desk in the last 12 months, which was really good. We've now done the major deck refurb. We've had some big wins with storage. We've got our lifting platform, the loading dock. We've got our personnel lift, which we can get up on the stage, which makes it much safer. Look, yeah, long term, 5, 10 plus years, you know, whether it's co-location with gallery, larger theatre, green room, more seating, the possibilities are endless. I guess we're blessed we do have land there, so we've got possibility and potential, but like everything, it's going to be the, you know, what is it, Brett, when budgeting is where dreams meet reality?
Meets reality, yeah.
So we can dream big, but somebody's got to pay the bills.
Like dreams, you've got to have ambitions to turn around and throw things on the table.
Yeah.
Is there a recording? The Christian Outreach Centre at the big church there has a recording studio in there. Do we have that at the J?
No.
Would we have the capacity? Because I know they rent that out, they hire that out.
Yeah.
Would there be the capacity to do something like that?
At the J?
Yeah.
My understanding of building a space like that is that it is quite expensive to kit it out properly.
We've got a couple of private operators that have got recording studios in their region as well.
There's already a market there.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, we do have Noosa FM, obviously, at the J, who have some capacity to do community recording and broadcasting and whatnot, which is good, but it's probably not something we'd try to continue to, I think.
We considered that as part of with the work at Rufus Street. Yeah. So where we're converting the existing community house to an extension of the digital hub, one of the things we looked at there was recording studio space. But it is very expensive to fit out, and there's actually quite a few private providers here in Noosa. So something that we took off the books for now. To get it right is very expensive. Yeah, okay.
Ash, a year ago, the staff did a fantastic job when at a moment's notice they converted the J and also the leisure centre into an evacuation centre.
Almost exactly a year ago.
You've mentioned that there were some learnings from that.
Yeah.
Can you talk generally about how things would be done differently if the same thing were to occur? What would you change? What have been the learnings?
Trying to get more notice this time, but no.
Well, I'm only mentioning because
so poor old Frank doesn't have to be the one there taking registrations.
Yeah, look at us, we've got the emergency come.
You mentioned that there were learnings from that.
Yeah.
So,
I guess the registration process was something that we saw with large events when you've got hundreds of people turning up at short notice is really chaotic for everyone. So some of the learnings from that and some of the things we'll look to implement is if we have similar events moving forward, we'll actually just try to encourage people to come to the centres in the first instance to take shelter and become safe, and then stop and think about, okay, is there anywhere else that they might be able to go? Can they go to family or friends? So in that instance, and we found that anyway, that people were at the J for the first few hours and then they called around and figure out where they could go and they chose to go somewhere else. But the problem was we were trying to register everyone in amongst that, which caused, large queues, as you know. So I think that would certainly help. We're looking at the registration process itself, and by the time we got to the second or third or fourth event last year, we were starting to record entries straight into Guardian, which is the system that we use to manage the disaster management as a whole, but also evacuation centres.
QR code scan as you come in and as you leave?
Look, it's possible. I think Guardian are looking at some of that at the moment.
Yeah, just thinking that with what we're doing at sports and recreational activities now to sign in and sign out.
Yeah, and that's also something we'll be looking at our facilities now to try and get away from some of the paper. But
with those additional challenges.
Yeah, I mean, COVID's kind of a real game changer, and then we've got a meeting tomorrow to talk more about what are the impacts of that for evacuation centres and what are the things we need to be mindful of. So look, I think registration, some of our other learnings were we will have a strong preference to try and get the two major evac centres up and running and reach capacity before we try to activate some of the smaller ones, because you end up just spreading resources too thinly. In terms of bedding was another big learning. I think Brett was there at 1 AM dropping off stretchers and trying to set up these things with end bars and jamming fingers and
absolutely, I remember that.
Thinking about tapping somebody on the shoulder at 2 o'clock in the morning saying, "Oh, I've got a bed for you now." But so it was actually out with James.
We've got good news for you for next time.
Yeah, went out with James last week, who's our disaster management officer, and had a look at some options for getting our own stockpile of stretchers that are actually easy to set up and pack up and quite comfortable. And looking at getting some storage where we've essentially got a shipping container where we can have a couple of hundred stretchers, pillows, mattresses ready to go.
So some of the more senior people had trouble getting up and down from the mattresses.
Yeah.
So the stretchers would be much
better.
Higher.
Yeah. So bedding was a massive learning. I think food, there are a few smaller learnings, but that probably functioned okay. There was no shortage of food, which was really pleasing. At the J specifically, the configuration of that centre is somewhat problematic when you run as an evacuation centre, because you've got the different entry and exit points and split levels and nooks and crannies. So again, that's where we probably have a preference for the leisure centre in the first instance, and then talking about some of the other centres. So, but the pleasing learnings were the staff can do it, and the community comes together, and everyone chips in and helps out. And if you're looking for a place where people can come and be safe and feel safe, then we can absolutely do that, and that's the main thing. So.
It was done very well.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, it must be. Is it a year tomorrow?
Year tomorrow.
Yeah. So we had actually talked with some of the people at the J about we had a 1-year anniversary and a few drinks down at the bar back at the J, but we can't do that at the moment, so we might have to do year 2 at the J maybe.
Any further?
Happy to move it.
Move Frank. Seconded Claire. All in favour? Thanks again. Item 5.
I need to declare a conflict of interest on the secretary of the Noosa Gymnastics Club, who are a principal tenant at the Bicentennial Community Centre, and I'll leave the room.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
All good. Item 5. Bicentennial Community Centre full year report.
Lease terms, Ash. when does the gymnastic and Montessori leases expire?
Off the top of my head, I don't actually know the dates. They're both reasonably long term.
Montessori's only fairly recent, last couple of
Yeah,
years.
Montessori's actually there's one lease in place with the ability to expand it to encompass the whole site, and that's the process we're going through at the moment, to incorporate the rear area in the lease instead of just a hire arrangement.
Yep.
The gym club will be fairly long because they've just extended the hall.
Yeah.
To accommodate themselves.
I think it was
$100,000 worth of upgrades.
10 years initially plus options. So yeah, I don't actually know the date off the top of my head, but it's very much a long-term lease. The gymnastics club were great, so they actually, the extension that was put onto that building, was it now 12, 18 months ago, maybe more?
A bit more than that.
2 years ago. That was actually funded, so it was $1 million expansion. The club put in $500,000 of their own money, and then they got a matching grant from the state government. So council didn't actually have to contribute anything to that expansion, despite the fact that it's our asset. So yes, obviously the lease terms for them are such that they can get some kind of value for a little while out of that.
Pay for the water upgrade.
Council did contribute to some of the required infrastructure.
Thank you. We did contribute somewhat.
Yeah.
And during COVID, I note that the gymnastic, Noosa Gymnastic Club received rent relief from Noosa Council, and Montessori, who continued to operate during the period, did not.
Yep.
Can you elaborate?
So we contacted Montessori and said, if you believe that you're being adversely impacted by this in terms of you can't operate the school, or your numbers are significantly down, or people are taking their children away and therefore you're losing enrolments and fees, we're more than happy to talk to you about it. But given the nature of their funding, and they do get funding from the Education Department as well, is my understanding, for each child that's enrolled there, they didn't approach us and say that there was a need or justification for rent relief, whereas Noosa Gymnastics Club, like our facilities, had to shut down and couldn't operate at all, and obviously that meant they couldn't generate any revenue at all during that period. So,
and that relief has expired, has it, Ash?
Yeah, so now that they're back up and running in term 3, Gymnastics Club is starting back up. Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Anything further? Well, in that case, can I move? Claire, second Amelia. All in favour? Thank you. Carried?
Councillor Wilkie.
Yeah, don't forget him. As I said earlier, item 6, Noosa Community Support Full Year Report. Sorry, I was flicking through. Councillors, questions? I'll ask the question. Impact of COVID on this place?
Yeah,
That would have been, I mean, all of these places, all of the aged care facilities have been challenged. I mean, this one would have been a very challenging...
yeah, it was a really interesting one. You know, obviously dealing with some of the most vulnerable people in our community, but also those that really need the services to keep going. And then we're funded via state and federal funding, so obviously they had some guidelines for how they would like things delivered, but we are ultimately a council program, so we also had some input into that. So yeah, there was this real tension between delivering services to those that are most vulnerable, but trying to find ways that we could do it because we didn't want to stop service delivery completely. So effectively, group activities stopped for a period of months there, being the highest risk activity. But we found ways to continue to deliver services, either one-on-one, calling up and just offering support over the phone, delivering shopping instead of having clients head out to the shops with us, going and getting that for them and taking it back to their home. Still doing some of the building maintenance works, outside if that was a high priority, that was easy. Inside with precautions. Obviously there's been infection control measures and screening to make sure that nobody's sick and client hasn't been sick or been in a hotspot and all those kind of things. But the team have done tremendously well to get through that. It is starting to get a little bit easier, although obviously we're very mindful of aged care and the risks that do present there, and taking guidance from funding bodies and from council's COVID team. But at this point,
ongoing testing of staff and clients, or
sorry,
ongoing testing of staff and clients for COVID.
No required testing, but obviously if somebody's not feeling well, they stay away and go and get tested if they're presenting the symptoms, but it's not a requirement of coming to work that you be tested on a regular basis, and that hasn't come through any of the guidance from the funding bodies. We are a little bit different to a residential aged care facility, where obviously if you get a case in one of those facilities, it can spread very quickly and people live there. So we haven't been running our centre programs since end of March. We're talking about easing our way back into that in October if things progress well in Queensland, but that's far from certain, obviously. We've got some smaller groups out off site now and activities outdoors, taking people down to the river for a stroll and grabbing a bite to eat, things like that. So,
you mentioned personal protective equipment as one way of reducing the risk of spreading COVID. What other ways did you try to reduce the risk of cross-contamination? Did you provide cutlery in trays? Like was it just I'm just thinking the volunteering staff were probably going from one home to another house, so cross-contamination I would think would have been something that you guys would have addressed.
The only place where we serve meals is at the centre, so when we haven't been running that hasn't been an issue for us.
Okay, so
where staff are taking clients out in the car, then there's a procedure in terms of cleaning the car before and after each client. So wiping down, so the staff have kits there with sanitizer and wipes, hand sanitizer. There's a risk assessment that's been done on the major risks in terms of that, seating clients in the rear seat diagonally opposite from the driver to maximise the space, all those kinds of things. So we worked closely with our COVID team and our workplace health and safety team in terms of the risk management side of it. But predominantly the PPE side of things, infection control, which is really the basics in terms of washing your hands, personal hygiene, making sure you're not coming to work when you're sick, having the screenings and the questionnaires there to make sure the staff are well and the clients are well, and obviously monitoring guidance from funding bodies really closely.
You've said that you lost 5 staff during this period. Your staff numbers have dropped from 20 to 25 to 20. When things go back to normal, is that going to impact on your ability to deliver services?
No, so that reduction in our total FTE actually related to funding that was lost at the start of financial year, so completely separate from COVID. So effectively there was a state funding program called Queensland Community Care, so we used to have 3 different funding streams within Noosa Community Support. And then when the NDIS program was rolled out in the Noosa region, a vast majority of clients that receive services under the Queensland Community Care program would become eligible under the NDIS program. So that QCC program was actually abolished, and they replaced some of the funding with a Queensland Community Support program, CS. And that went out via open tender, and we applied for that funding but missed out on it, which was where we saw the reduction in our funding of around $400,000, which meant, because we have to operate to a zero bottom line there, so whatever we receive in we have to spend, but we can't spend more than what we've got, obviously. We had to identify about $400,000 worth of savings, and we were quite fortunate that a lot of that coincided with people that were retiring or resigning, and we had the ability to change the structure around a little bit and choose not to replace some of those positions to be able to reduce our total costs in line with the reduced funding.
Ash, just looking at page 46, and the team that deal with all the telephone calls and the welfare checks, and that's a pretty small team. I've been out there and they do a great job. I mean, I'm just looking here, telephone welfare checks, 782, welfare visits, 230. I mean, and these are ranging from 15 minutes up to 2.5 hours. How is the workload on those particular staff members? I mean, have they felt under significantly more pressure with the workload that COVID's presented?
It's probably been a bit of give and take because we haven't run the centre itself. We normally have kind of 4 staff that are tasked with operating the centre each day. So we go out in the buses, we collect clients, bring them back into the centre, run the programs, get them back on the bus and take them back out. So because we haven't been doing that, we've been able to effectively redeploy them to other internal tasks. So I wouldn't say the workload in terms of total number of hours has become any worse for them. Obviously, it's been a stressful time, understandably so. But again, they've been grateful for the fact that work has been able to continue. So
great.
Yeah, and we helped out, I think we mentioned in the report, helped out some of the Meals on Wheels services around the Shire as well, who again suffered that same problem of volunteers kind of dropping off and needing people to step up. So
So during COVID, again on page 46, the services provided, you've got domestic assistance, for example, 2,780 visits, I guess. How does that compare to previous years?
I haven't actually got the tables in here. It is down a little bit, but the funding provider's been really good with regard to flexibility provisions. So I normally don't report on year-to-year comparisons because there's only so many outputs that we can deliver. So basically we're funded for these various funding programs and we're required to deliver X number of services. So it's not something where we'd, unlike the Aquatic Centre or the Leisure Centre, we wouldn't look to grow the number of services that we're delivering because we're not actually funded for that, which would just put more strain on the team to try and deliver more services with the same amount of money because you don't get more funding if you over-deliver.
I guess my question is, as a result of COVID, more people are homebound. Does that mean by necessity you're going out more to have contact with people? Or are they saying, stay away, I'm isolating?
Bits of both. Some people didn't want any services because they were really cautious. Other people said, I'm really not concerned about COVID, but I just love this service. I'd love to see somebody, or can you come and have a chat, connect with me? So there was a whole range of different scenarios there. Obviously, we respected people's wishes. We never forced ourselves upon somebody if they didn't want us there, but if they did want to see, we found a way to do it. So there were plenty of ups and downs. Overall, total services delivered will be down slightly, but the nature of how they've been delivered has changed, which isn't as efficient.
Is there, reluctance not the right word, but I see value in having comparative data for the services delivered, not as KPIs, but just so we can track trends and ask questions about what's going on with staff and people at home. Another comment is, with all the other reports, I found it really useful to have the comparative data on previous years. Were you concerned about not comparing apples with oranges or something here because of the changed funding arrangements?
It can change because of the output requirements and the intricacies of the funding agreements and our reporting requirements back to funding bodies. It's probably something that because our accountability for the outputs there is actually back to the funding provider as opposed to back to council. So the Aquatic Centre and the Leisure Centre, the J, are very much a council service, and our performance there impacts council's budget. NCS, because we're bulk funded via federal and state programs, that's actually our funding provider, and that's who we report back to on. So I can certainly do it so you can get a sense as to what are we doing and is it changing significantly, but I guess the financial
what do the trends mean? What's going on? Not as a KPI.
Well, it may well be, Frank, that there isn't a trend, that it's not actually bad, because each year we're funded to do this. So we do X number. Next year we're funded to do X. So it's not that like the J or the Leisure Centre, the Aquatic Centre.
It's not ratepayers,
no.
Well, and you're not actually mapping trends because it may well just be every year it's exactly the same because that's all we're funded to do. So that's what we do.
It's all actually predetermined in the funding agreement. So years in advance, we actually already know now how many outputs we're required to achieve in each of these areas under our funding agreements moving forward. And as I said, if we overachieve, it actually just puts more strain on the team because our funding doesn't increase proportionally.
So last year the total revenue would have been $400,000 less than that 2591 figure, for example.
Last year the revenue would have been $400,000 more, but the expenses would have been as well. And again, mapping it like for like would have looked messy because of that. But,
and there were different outputs for that. So it had its own outputs to deliver because of the different funding stream.
And our funding streams actually change again this year, so our output requirements are different again because we've got more funding for respite care but less for some of the other activities. So
it's an interesting one, I guess, because when we talk about Noosa community support as a whole service, when actually what we're delivering are specific grant programs.
Yeah, you're acquitting grants.
And we're acquitting grants. That's essentially a couple of big grants that have specific requirements, and that's what we report on. Yeah. And that might change from year to year what we have to report on or what outputs we have to provide. Yeah.
Activities like domestic assistance, home maintenance and home modification are typically covered under patients' plans under NDIS and things like that. Does any of that come into play here with respite?
Depends how deep you want to dig, but
well, I know
yes,
in Laura's case, I mean, if she wanted to get a modification, she has to get NDIS approval, and then it gets put into the budget for the next year. And then
depending on people's circumstances, they may be eligible for funding under a variety of programs. So yes, you could have lots of different people in the community that get a service that looks very similar, but is actually provided under completely different funding agreements and by different providers. For us, we typically don't do the aged care package care or the home care packages, and then they range from levels 1 to 4, which is where somebody might be allocated a package of $50,000, and then they can spend it on these activities, and then they can go and source their provider of those activities. Ours isn't, that's called consumer directed care. Ours is still bulk funding to us as the organisation, and then they say to us, based on our estimates, we think it's reasonable that you could or should deliver X number of these outputs in this region. There should be enough demand there for you. And then people will contact us, or they go through the My Aged Care process and they're assessed and recommended to come to us. And then we determine their eligibility for home maintenance and whether there's a co-contribution required or not, and whether that's under the Commonwealth program or the state program, or if they have home care package, can that cover it? So that's why I try not to get into too much detail in those reports, because it is a bit of a
potential impact of some of these things.
What really interests me about this, you mentioned a generational shift occurring as more and more baby boomers access NCS services. So you're talking about the pre-war generation giving way to the post-war generation. What is the shift that's being observed in terms of demand for services? So I think what do the boomers want that the pre-war generation?
Yeah, we're seeing that they want to be more active,
more hooked in, connected in terms of communication.
Yeah, definitely do some of the digital stuff and communication, but they don't. The previous generation was perhaps happier or more content to come to a centre, stay there for the day, sit around, play rummy or cards, have their meal, have a bit of a chat and get back on the bus and go back home. What we're seeing now is a transition to people that are still pretty able-bodied, still reasonably capable and able of getting out, and they need some assistance with that, and they want to be doing it with other people, and they want some support around them, but they don't just want to come to the centre and sit there for 5 hours and then go back home. They want to be out and about doing things and doing activities, going down to the cafe, having a coffee, being out and about. So yeah, probably more independent, more active. So that just means we need to think about some of the programs that we deliver and how they transition and meet their needs. So.
You recall some years ago there was a proposal to build a seniors centre. We were saying at the time the baby boom generation will not want to go to a seniors centre.
They don't see themselves as seniors?
Don't see themselves as seniors. And they don't want their activities to be confined to one building that's, that's where they can go.
Understandably.
Understandably. So
a lot more home
see
care.
This through our facilities and programs like our Ageing Well programs. If you put on good programs and activities that meet the wide range of needs, they will come on board. But with this fundamental shift in being put in a box.
Nothing further?
No.
More questions asked?
No, well done.
We have a mover?
I'll move it.
I'll second.
Councillor Wilkie, second. All in favour? And I think that,
Could you pass on to all your staff? Thanks for the last 12 months. It's been pretty trying for all of those guys.
Yeah.
Team in terms of
Just
doing
front line,
just being-
Please pass that on.
Yeah, well done.
Yeah, well done to all the team.
yeah, considering they've been, how impacted they've been, and how versatile they've been, and willing to go out there and take on other activities has been brilliant. Thank you. So please pass on our
Absolutely.
thanks.
And we're looking forward to seeing you out there. I think it's 8th of October. We're
Yes.
hopefully getting most of you out there for a bit of a tour and a quick meet and greet with all the staff. So, well, not all the staff, but
We'll
the key
expect,
staff.
we'll expect pickleball, table tennis, basketball, everything.
You can
Everything
fit that in
we'll offer
15
at the-
minutes.
at the
Ballet.
leisure centre, all
Ballet.
I want to do
and a quick
ballet.
50,
Isn't
quick
there
dozen
dance?
laps at the net.
That's